Alex,
Yes, Sarah?
did you ever go through a Cowboys are cool phase?
I am in an alt-country band, so I think I might be going through it right now.
I heard you've been writing songs for that band about how you got broken up with for a monogamist.
Yeah, I guess he's the real cowboy.
Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah, a queer therapist, writer, parent.
And I'm Alex, just a boring straight white guy with a communications job. But I am in that band, so, maybe I'm pretty
Right, yeah, you mentioned that just like a few seconds ago.
cool. People should know.
And how do you and I know each other?
Well, I know you as the woman who took my children to McDonald's not once but twice this last weekend.
Oh, they promised they wouldn't tell you.
Yep. I know all about it.
Little stinkers. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the last time that's going
breakfast
to happen.
and dinner at McDonald's in one day, huh? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As I mentioned to Jessica, 10 out of 10, no notes.
Yeah. Very impressive.
Great day. Jessica, did you get that McDonald's breakfast in?
Oh man, I wish I got a McDonald's breakfast because I took a train trip this past weekend and I went to the dining car and innocently ordered a grilled cheese sandwich. And you know what they did with that thing? They put it in the microwave.
Oh. That's like how they grilled it?
That's how they grilled it.
Wow.
It was not pre-grilled.
So, the word grilled does have a meaning in the term grilled cheese.
Right.
I think what you had was a microwave cheese.
And they charged me like $11 for it.
All right. Yes. Microwave cheese sandwiches. It sounds like you did have some notes for.
Yeah, I had notes on that. Everything else about the weekend was great. Really fell apart with that microwave sandwich.
So speaking of disappointments, Alex, are you going to tell us about this breakup, or do we just have to keep listening to vague songs that allude to it?
Yeah, I actually think I'm going to write one where the metaphor for the relationship is a microwave cheese sandwich.
I like that.
It was like the microwave cheese sandwich of a relationship.
Yeah, he's working on an album here.
Yeah.
People.
Ooh, that's bad.
No, it was fine. Over the summer, when this seems to always happen, when breakups happen when we're on our podcast break over the summer for some reason. I had a short relationship that was like, it was nice, and it was a person that I met on the apps, and they were, ostensibly non-monogamous, and like on our, I think our second date, the person told me that they'd been in like a pretty long, like a 5-year monogamous relationship that they had just pretty recently gotten out of, or like that's maybe when I found out how recently that had been, and they were like interested in they're like, I feel like I've always kind of been non-monogamous, and I'm excited to be exploring that now, and we dated for like 4 months or something like that.
It seems like it was a little longer than that.
Maybe 5, 6.
I have it like in 5 or 6 territory in my mind, at least.
Okay, fact check. 5 or 6. I'm not going to count right now because that would be tedious. But after 5 or 6 months, I got this "we have to talk" text, and I kind of knew what the text was because the person had told me after the first chunk of that time that we were dating, they'd spent a fair amount of time talking about their ex and how like bad that relationship was, and sort of doing comparisons to how much better they felt now that they weren't in it anymore. And then they talked about like how they'd started like kind of seeing that person again as a friend, and then like it seemed like it had kind of re-escalated. So I sort of expected what the thing we might have to talk about was, and it was dun 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 that they had getting back together with their ex, and that person was not comfortable with non-monogamy, and would only date them if they would be monogamous with them, and thus our relationship had to end.
Ouch.
Yeah.
I felt that in my stomach.
Yeah.
I felt it, like that feeling of the text coming in, and then knowing what the text was, and then having it confirmed. It's just like a series of my stomach dropping into my shoes.
Yeah, and of course that stuff is always like on Tuesday morning or something like that, where you're like, cool, I always kind of like lean into like, I'm gonna just try to get this out of the way as quickly as I want to find out. I don't want to not know, the thing that I maybe kind of know. I want to just get all the information as quickly as possible. So I usually like move to do that, and I'm like, yeah, I have all the information now, and I don't feel better. But I think that I'm going to be able to just be like, oh, well, I'll just get over it in 2 days and it'll be fine. But of course, it drug on for a long time. And there was a lot of other, the whatever they call it in relation. I feel like there's a third and fourth and fifth act.
Yes.
Is that we won't go into here, but.
I would just like to say, as kind of a perhaps relevant aside related to watching your partner or partners go through breakups, is that it just really is such an experience where that these other acts have to unfold before the thing is over, but you can't tell them to skip over it. Like,
right.
You just have to go through those acts, and it's so painful to watch.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for not saying anything.
I believe I tried one time and you got very mad at me.
Yeah. Stop it.
So I was like, lesson learned. Lesson learned. You can't learn people's lessons for them.
No. Yes. Totally.
But wait, so I thought you guys said this episode was about cowboys.
That's right. This person was a rancher.
Yeah. it was Eamon Bundy, weirdly.
Did they have horses?
Yeah. I mean, I would understand if this person owned horses. Being left for a person who owns horses, that is, I'm not going to take that personal.
Legit.
Always legit.
It's always personal. Always legit, yeah. No, a cowboy this is like a poly non-monogamy term for a person who... a monogamous person who gets non-monogamous people and forces them to be monogamous. That's cowboying or cowgirling, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
This is not a thing I've ever actually said myself. But,
yes, that's the term.
You weren't the cowboy. She got cowboyed.
I was not the cowboy. I was the steer. No, I don't know what I was.
You were
They got cowboyed.
They got cowboyed, yeah.
Yes.
The person I was dating got cowboyed, is what you would say, yeah. And the person, I guess in theory, the person they went on to date was the cowboy.
Right. Okay. Her ex.
Yeah. So there's a clip from an Instagram account, Polyphilia, that where she's sort of explaining this, that we could explaining how this works, or
Okay.
what it means.
Let's see what she has to say
We're
about
not
it.
very good at explaining it, clearly, so let me pull that up.
As big city people, we're not good at explaining what a cowboy does.
Does the cowboy ride the cow or?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
We're like,
think-
but where does the poking come in?
It's poking all the way through,
Who's
I don't
getting-
think.
And then branding.
Oh,
And,
so cowboy means like a monogamous person, like lassoed them away from the herd. Yeah, that's where it comes from.
I like that.
Yeah. So a cowboy just means like when a monogamous person traps a polyamorous person into monogamy.
But what if that person chooses monogamy? Does he
Then that's different. But yeah, like
Okay.
Yeah, but definitely, because monogamy is such like the norm. Like it's very common for people to be like, oh well, they like me, so.
I just want them to like me back.
Yeah. Oh, on top of that.
what's up with the pan piping?
I think it was a Twitch stream she was doing, and so she's just having a conversation with somebody, and
They're playing video games or something.
Yeah, it's probably a video.
God. I'm like, is that somehow relevant?
If you watch the video, there's a tiny leprechaun playing a flute next to her.
Being
Leprechauning is a completely different term in non-monogamy.
Tune in next week and we will explain leprechauning.
I think leprechauning is when you're like chasing the rainbow for
that's
a pot
good.
of gold that doesn't
That's
exist.
fucking good.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Register trademark.
We should. I don't think you can trademark.
I just did that. I trademarked it.
Well, that's not how trademarking works. But we should talk after the
Copyright.
You
that.
have a lot of
Copyright.
You think you have a lot of trademarks that you don't have. So.
I hold them all.
Okay.
Patent.
Patent.
I declare a patent on this.
That's what you're doing is dibsing, and it doesn't hold up in court. Okay, so she said, now I've forgotten. She said, when a monogamous person lassos a polyamorous person, and I can't
Takes
remember.
them away from the herd.
Yeah,
I
it takes
think
them away
she
from
said.
the herd. And it's sort of implying that it's like somewhat like forceful or like against their will.
That's what's coming up for me here.
And then he said, what did the guy say? He says, but what if they
What if they want to be monogamous?
want to be monogamous? And she says, well, that's different. But then she kind of starts to say, but monogamy is such the norm that perhaps like, I don't know. It's definitely like creating this impression that, like, I guess she's saying you like that person so much that you're willing to submit to their demands.
Need for monogamy.
Their need for monogamy, yeah, to relent to their demands.
Yeah, and I think what's coming up for me, and I think it was coming up for the person on the couch too, was like, but how is that happening against their will?
Right.
Like, there's this whole kind of narrative of intent here that the person, this secretly monogamous person, or this nefarious monogamous person, is gonna go in and manipulate the situation to try and like get someone against their will away from their identity or the relationships that they want to actually be in. Which is like a little bit specious, I think.
I think it's like coming from it's sort of like in-group terminology, right? That is describing a thing that happens, and it kind of feels that way when it happens. And I would say from my own perspective, it was very easy for it to kind of feel that way, that like, the person that I was dating was like having a good time exploring non-monogamy, was, enjoying dating me. I was putting no constraints on our relationship and what they could do. And then, this person who had a bunch of rules and maybe was like, in my perception, less evolved than me and hadn't interrogated their own biases and, just like hadn't really explored the possibilities and just had this closed-minded sort of knee-jerk monogamous orientation, was saying, no, you can't do that.
Yeah, and that stings. I mean, I don't mean to make fun. Because it does really sting when it feels like you have something going with someone that is thoughtful and meaningful and collaborative, and you're building something between the two of you that is serving what the two of you need. And then someone else comes in and is like, well, none of this is serving me, so stop it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be like defending Cowboys here. But I also think that this gets pretty nuanced pretty quickly. Like, plenty of people try non-monogamy for a while and it works, and then it stops working and maybe it works again. Sometimes people are non-monogamous for like a period in their lives and not other periods, or they choose to not be practicing non-monogamy in the interest of building a primary partnership or having children, or, there's a lot of reasons why people might move in and out of practicing non-monogamy.
Right. The opportunity to date an incredibly charming and handsome person arises. They can't resist.
Yes, you're talking about you here, not the cowboy.
Yes, I was talking about me. Or, I mean, anybody. Could have been you.
It could have been me. And I understand that, like, when these things arise and other partnerships aren't prioritized or ended in the interest of those, like, life decisions, it's hurtful.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the question I'm asking is it wrong? And I don't know if that distinction matters that much, but I'm kind of curious about, like, can we hold the fact that people might move in and out of non-monogamy, or might try it and then decide it's not for them, or might only operationalize it for a period in their lives, and that isn't a failure of their non-monogamy or of the relationships they had when they were non-monogamous?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see that, but it's interesting. Like, I feel like I've witnessed this phenomenon. Like, it's definitely a thing that happens. It seems like, in my highly scientific study of a few people that I know.
Yes, it definitely is a thing that happens. It's a thing that has happened to me. It's a thing that has happened to a lot of people that I know and who I work with in my practice. That thing being, you have a relationship that feels pretty good. That person is looking for a primary partner, or they encounter someone who wants to be a primary partner, and that partnership can't tolerate your existing relationship, and so it ends.
Yeah.
This happens a lot. You're absolutely right.
I mean, and so I'm sure, there's nuance, every situation is different, that kind of thing, but it definitely seems like there's potentially an element of shame here. That, like, people who are non-monogamous are part of a counterculture, right? Or, like, not the mainstream, and so potentially, so it's like you're constantly sort of like working against the default, the path of least resistance, that kind of thing. So that seems like, I mean, do you think that that's part of what could be going on? People are being shamed out of their non-monogamous ways.
I mean, I think that's what she was saying, and I do want to, in the clip that we played, and I do want to make a plug for, like, we're kind of picking apart what she said in the moment, but that's a great account for, like, general sort of poly-affirming, like, she's very deep in the culture and kind of, like, speaks to, like, those experiences in a way that is very kind of like, it's not super like interrogative of the whys, but more like, we're doing this counterculture thing, and like I'm gonna like talk about like why it's important and valuable, and I think there's definitely like a productive space for that. So if you want to follow it, it's Polyphilia blog, and we'll put it in the show notes. But that is this sort of like, again, like this in-group thing where she's like talking about like they lassoed them and pulled them out of the herd, and that herd is like the poly community that clearly like people are kind of protective of, right? And like it's people who have broken
small and
free,
threatened.
and they're people who have broken free from that mainstream, and it feels small and threatened perhaps by that shame that you're talking about. Yeah.
Right. And there is always this looming question that I think probably people in polyamory are aware of, and that is like, can you establish a primary partnership while practicing non-monogamy?
I was just wondering that too.
And I think it is difficult.
And can a secondary partnership survive one of the people's transitions into a new primary partnership? I don't know that I've ever seen that happen.
Me either. Which doesn't mean it hasn't. I'm sure it has.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are a lot of examples of how it has. And I would love for people who have those examples in their lives to reach out to us and talk to us about it. But I do think it is hard. Let's talk a little bit about why it would be hard. Why are we all just nodding right now and acknowledging that, yeah, of course that would be hard?
Yeah. I mean, I think because to demonstrate the sort of primacy of that primary partnership, or to demonstrate its like strength and importance, or for it to like get established, it sort of needs to lay waste to all that's in its path. Okay, I'm using exaggerated terminology, but like, maybe it really feels like for the new partner to feel like secure and primary, like, those other relationships are gonna kind of naturally feel threatening. I don't know. Is that true? I feel like if they were cool, it wouldn't be true. I mean, just be cool.
It does make me think about how hard it is, like, just when your friends get a new primary partner, and how frequently, someone will start dating someone or decide to marry someone that you don't like, and that can be friendship ending, or it can be a way that, like, you have a person suddenly, like, way less in your life than they were before. Like, it's a
real
big life shift, right?
I mean, it is also a trope for a reason that just in the world of monogamy, when people fall in love and are pursuing a primary partnership that like might lead to marriage, that you don't see that person as their friend for like months and months and months and months and months.
So it's possible you wouldn't see them as their secondary partner too.
That there's just this way that like all of the oxygen kind of gets directed towards that relationship, and it's hard to know how to maintain enough oxygen for friendships and other relationships, let alone other romantic relationships. And if you have people, and it's probably the case, that at least some of the people in that constellation are going to be relatively new to non-monogamy and not have a lot of practice with that.
Yeah. So you'd have to have a lot of tolerance for a lot of variation and like the kind of like stability and the level of engagement in your relationship to be able to kind of like tolerate that change.
Which makes me want to tell a sad story.
Ooh, a
sad
tale?
cowgirl story.
I think this is still a cowboy story, actually. I don't know what story you're going to tell, but go on, and we'll decide. We'll ascribe the gender of this
I just
cow
think it's sexy
person.
to imagine that it's a couple of cowgirls. So just picture cowgirls.
Okay, there's 2 cowgirls on the range.
2 cowgirls on the range. And it's lonely and it's cold.
Yeah.
And no, okay.
There's huddled around a fire.
We'll fan fiction this out later.
Okay.
People have definitely heard me talk about a relationship of mine that ended now probably 2 years ago. A year and a half ago now. A long time ago. And it was a relationship that was almost a year long in and of itself. And a person who was like in a transitionary period in their life, coming out of a long monogamous marriage, trying to figure out what's next, and dating non-monogamously. And in this case, like that person was really actively looking for a primary partner. They knew that was on the table from the very beginning. And I think both of us knew that when that happened, and in my mind, it was certainly more a question of when, not if. When that happened, it was going to be difficult. Every single time this partner of mine, this ex-partner of mine, would be dating a new person, I would be listening for how our relationship might fit into that. You know? And there would be some candidates where I'm like, well, that's not going to work. You know? Like, I could just hear it, you know? Or I was like on guard, I guess.
Yeah. Do you think that was like your sort of perception or your feelings and fears talking, or do you think that was like practicality?
Who knows? But I guess the thing I would say is we're 2 women in partnership with each other. She was primarily dating men. And one thing that I could kind of notice was a lot of these men were not like actively non-monogamous, but they were dating around. Right? So they were like chill with the idea that she had other partners or was dating me, as long as we were kind of in the dating around vibes,
Right.
generally. But I was often aware, I'm like, this person has no experience with non-monogamy, right? They're going to think that our relationship is hot until this becomes potentially a primary partnership, in which case the fact that you have a girlfriend that you see regularly and are sleeping with is going to take on a whole different meaning. You know? And it's like, I was just kind of aware of that, that was going to be real. And surprise, surprise.
It was.
It was real.
All your worst fears came true.
You know, and that's like an unfair simplification, or oversimplification of what happened. But, you know, it was really hard for her to pursue a primary partnership with someone who, you know, she's still with that person. It has gone on to be like a central relationship for her, and navigate having me as a partner at the same time. And, you know, looking back, if I had to do it again, I guess I remember her saying at one point, like, I'm having a really hard time establishing this primary partnership and dating you. And I don't know how to navigate it. And neither does this new partner of mine. Can we press pause on this? Can we put it on hold? Can we be friends for a while I do that, and then sort of revisit the possibility of like a romantic relationship continuing? And I was just like, no.
Right.
You know? And I think in retrospect, I have to take some responsibility for how inflexible I was in that department too. I'm not sure that I would have done it differently. I don't know. But I just am kind of acknowledging, based on what you just said, like, when people are establishing primary partnerships, they can sometimes disappear from the other relationships of their lives, or it can be hard to continue prioritizing those relationships in the same way. If you watch your friend going through that, you kind of know in the back of your head, they're going to have new relationship energy. There's going to be this real excitement around this. And then 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, 2 years, we're going to be back at it.
They'll be back.
And you do have that perspective. It's harder to have that perspective as a romantic partner. And I definitely had a complete failure of perspective and imagination there. And that's not me saying it was the wrong choice that it ended the way it did, but it's just kind of an observation.
Yeah. So maybe the next time that situation came around, you'd have that perspective. Just like probably the first time your friend gets into a new romantic partnership and disappears for a while, you're really pissed. And then the fifth time, you're like, yeah, this is what happens. They'll be back. So did you? So you got Cowboy too.
In a manner.
Do you feel like that's what happens? What happened? Do you feel like there was like nefarious goings on the Cowboy side? Was it like because that term again like kind of brings the sense that like a manipulation happened, like the central person is doesn't have is kind of like out of control of the situation, and it's like the third party is coming in and like is the one doing the cowboying, the one doing the lassoing. Is that how it felt?
At the time, probably. Like, I would say in the moment, I was kind of like, man, this sucks. And like, who is this other person? And why are they all of a sudden like getting in the middle of a relationship that was like feeling pretty good and okay? And so, yes, I think with the perspective of some time, it's more complicated than that. I don't think that person intended to do that at all. I don't think that there was like nefarious goals. I think it's complicated emotional dynamics.
Yeah.
And based on the uniqueness of those dynamics, the amount of experience people have, so on and so forth, sometimes you can get through them and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're meant to and sometimes you're not. I know that's all making me sound like more evolved around this stuff than I actually am.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, to be a little less evolved about it, like in the situation I was describing, I mean, I definitely just like heard the person that I was dating kind of say like, I really like you. Our relationship is great, but I'm not really like, I need to do this other thing, and I'm not really allowed to date you inside of that other thing. And it was very easy for me to kind of like, at least at the time, in part because I was still like really emotionally engaged with the person that I was dating, and I like wanted to be connected to them. It was easy for me to kind of like just blame the other person and just be like, God, I wish they didn't suck so much.
Uh-oh, my therapist brain is going off.
Yeah?
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, I think we talked about this term in our last episode, and it's definitely coming up for me again, is the term of triangulation. I think the question I would have for you, Alex, as you're describing that is, why did you know so much about what was going on with this metamor who you never met?
No.
So
never met him. Never met him once or more.
Oh, I get it. That
there?
was good.
Okay.
So I guess I'm like, I'm getting curious here.
About how I think of such stupid puns on the spot. That wasn't in the script.
I mean, I'm just amazed by that on a daily basis. No, I guess what I'm getting curious about is that a person you never met, and in the case of my relationship also ending because someone came in as a primary partner, I had never met them either.
Yeah.
And they become the target of the reason why this relationship isn't working.
Yeah.
But how odd that we would be very, very angry at people we had never met, or ascribe a lot of intent, or say that the relationship that we're in isn't working because of these people we'd never met.
Yeah.
But
and you're saying...
not direct those feelings towards the person we're actually in intimate relationship with.
And you're saying this is something called triangulation. Okay, so triangulation. What does it mean? Sarah?
Great. I brought it up, so I have to define it.
You have to.
Awesome.
It doesn't have anything to do with threesomes, right?
It certainly can show up in threesomes.
I think it actually might be if I'm understanding correctly, I think threesomes might actually be kind of a solution for triangulation.
Okay, let's put a
But
pin in
let's
that and
find
come
out.
back to it. So triangulation, the way I think about it and the way it shows up in my practice and in my life is when you have it's when you have a relationship between three people where there's a kind
Hot. Say more.
So like a threesome.
Fuck it, we're just going to talk about threesomes for the rest of this podcast.
Who's doing what to who?
All right, so the way triangulation, I think about it and the way I see it show up in my practice and in my life is where you have a kind of centered, intimate relationship between two people, and there's a third person, or even sometimes an entity, that gets blamed for something that is showing up between those two original people, right? Or some conflict between those two original people is getting projected onto a third party or person.
Okay.
So that's like a little bit abstract, but
So
go ahead.
it's not specific to non-monogamy.
Not specific to
Yeah.
non-monogamy at all. In fact, it's like a kind of classic relationship dynamic that therapists deal with all the time in more traditional relationship structures or families. I'm trying to think of like a really kind of a classic one that might show up. Yeah.
This is making me think about like the holidays, right? And like, you know, whose family you're going to go spend the holiday with, or, you know, oh God, it's like making me feel like I've had this very specific conflict in the past in relationships. And, you know, so we'll kind of just, instead of figuring out what you want to do, it'll be like, well, my mom insists this, or your mom insists this, or your family is impossible.
So we don't actually get to center
Right.
what is going on between the two of us. I'm never at any point going to take responsibility for the fact that I would like to spend the holidays with my mother.
Right.
And you don't want to. And that is a conflict that is actually between the two of us.
Right.
But instead of keeping it there and sort of working through whatever that material is, we're just projecting it out onto my mom is making me do this, right? My mom is insisting on this, or your mom
Right.
is. So it's like a projection out of what's happening between
Right.
the two people onto a third party.
But so there's like that kind of anytime it's a kind of projection out to another person, but then there's the sort of more specific instance where one party is like not taking responsibility for their own feelings and dynamics in the kind of two-person relationship, and instead like kind of punting those feelings or ascribing those feelings to
Right.
another person and saying it's my mom's
Right.
fault that this is happening, and whatever they want to do. It's like if my mom wants us to go to Christmas dinner at her house, regardless of how I feel about that, I should either come to you and say, you know, I should work out my feelings about that before I present them
Yes.
to you, rather than, you know, making them
Right,
kind of
there's
your
a-
problem to solve.
A big difference between coming to someone and saying, it's really important to me and my mom that we spend Thanksgiving together.
Right.
And I know that that might not be what you want to do. So I want to like talk through what our options are. Then coming to someone and being like, well, I don't know what to do about Thanksgiving. I mean, my mom like insists that we come over there, and it's not, I don't care what we do. I just don't want anyone to be
It's
mad
not
at me.
me, it's her.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is often when you'll hear
Right.
someone be like, I don't care what we do. I just don't want everybody to be mad at me.
Right.
You know, that's like a kind of classic signal that there's some kind of triangulation or like a lack of boundaries thing happening. You know, you hear it. I mean, it's so common. Like, I can't hang out because my husband doesn't want me to. It's like,
Right.
what? Why are we talking about your husband? I asked you to hang out. You know, like, I can't.
He won't let me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like the other person's feelings or experiences that third party isn't capable of influencing
Right.
the couple, their relationship, or the individuals in it. It's that you're just like outsourcing all of your own feelings onto that third person.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so then you could, of course, see how this would come up all the time in non-monogamy,
Totally.
because kind of by its nature, you know, in a monogamous culture, we're not used to having more than one person. You know, we were used to having these sort of binary relationships. And so, you know, it's especially hard to like control our instinct to kind of like triangulate once there are kind of like other people involved, and it's very easy to be like, my partner, you know, I'm doing things that are making my partner have hard feelings, and I want to just. And then there's this other person over here who they don't even know,
Right.
and it's much easier for me to just be like, it's not me that wants to do this thing. It's this person over here that you haven't met.
And I'm just like trying to make them happy, and I'm also
Yeah.
trying to make you happy.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, if you have issues with boundaries in your life, which by the way everybody does, so if you have issues with boundaries in your life, this is one of the first things that's going to come up in non-monogamy.
Right.
Where you're like, but I'm just like trying to keep these people happy, and like what might mean this person's happiness might make this person mad at me, and now I'm just afraid that everyone's going to be mad, and so now I'm either like projecting, triangulating, hiding, deceiving, because I'm trying to compartmentalize all of these things.
Yeah.
So I don't actually have to just be in touch with what I want.
Yeah.
And be honest about that to the people I'm in relationship with.
And when I first started to like kind of get familiar with this term, somewhere between 5 minutes and 5 weeks ago, I started really seeing it everywhere and kind of realizing times that I was doing it or being tempted to do it, or like ways in the past that I like learned the hard way, like, oh, it really doesn't serve you well to do that, and it doesn't feel good to have it done to you, because like, you know, in the situation I was describing, like it doesn't, here's this person over here that I've never met, and like I kind of just have to like hate that person or feel
Right.
shitty about that person and just be like, you know. And in that situation I did actually, like, I can't remember if I actually said this, but I was like, can I talk to him? Like, maybe if me and him talk it out, it would
Yeah.
be fine. And it's like, of course that's not actually going to happen, because, you know, who knows how much of it was really real, you know. So much of it is just like internal to the Hinge partner who is doing the triangulating, right?
I'm also
And their desire to like, their avoidance of responsibility for like what they want.
Yeah, I don't know if this is helpful here, but something that my mom always said, and it may actually be quoting a country song. I don't know. I'll have to look into this. She said, no matter what you hear or what you think you've seen, you never actually know what is going on in a relationship between two people behind closed doors. And I think that is very true. I keep that in mind all the time as a couples therapist and a relationship therapist. What I'm seeing in my office is still very different than what may be happening between these two people inside their own dynamic in private. So I think being wary of assuming that you know that the narration that you're getting about a relationship is actually representative of that relationship, it's safer to just be like, you know what, I have no idea what's going on with these people. I don't know. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
helpful. That's like, it's maybe not the most like sophisticated thought I've ever had about this stuff, but it does strike me that in the two cases that we're talking about, this recent breakup and the less recent breakup, for me, I was getting a lot of information about what was happening with this metamor, what was working, what wasn't working, how they were feeling. And I don't know that any of that information was all that relevant to me and that person's relationship and to what ultimately happened. Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah. I mean, it's interesting.
I hear in my practice all the time people who are in relationships that ended because another relationship couldn't tolerate this relationship, this original relationship. And you always hear the person say, I wish I could just talk to that person. If they would just meet me, right? But you know the reason why you're not meeting, right? You know the reason why you're not talking to that person? It's the person you're in relationship with.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that other person.
Yeah. I mean, and
I feel like I need a whiteboard and like some yarn.
yeah, right.
Text to explain all the people I'm talking about here. But you get it?
Totally. I mean, in so many of the examples, it's like I can hear myself having said stuff like that. I mean, it is when you're having a hard feeling and you don't want to disappoint someone, you don't want someone to be mad at you.
Yeah.
It feels better too to be like, well, it's not me. I don't want to hurt your feelings. It's, you know, this asshole over here.
With all of
and
his
then,
unevolved feelings.
right.
Yeah.
You know, and he's not in the room. You also don't want to hurt his feelings, but it doesn't hurt him because he's not here. Right.
Yeah.
it makes sense. You know, it's like I'm sympathetic to the ways that it's just trying to sort of meet out the like hard feelings in a way that is more palatable.
Yeah. So what should you do instead?
I'm not sure. I mean, one thing I was thinking about is I can't guess at what was going on in the relationship of yours that ended. So I'll go back to mine. And even so, I'm making some... I'm doing some guessing. But, you know, if my ex-partner had said right out the gate, listen, you knew from the beginning of dating me that finding a primary partner was my goal. And I have found someone, and he and I don't know how to navigate building the intimacy and trust that we need to build together and have other relationships. And that really sucks. And I feel like shit about it. And it doesn't mean that what you and I had didn't matter, but it is the thing that is more important to me right now. And so I got to end this. It would have hurt like hell. And I think it would have been more true and maybe more transparent and an authentic way of ending things than
Yeah.
we did
I mean, it's
ultimately.
interesting because that's kind of like what I heard. I mean, it wasn't that nuanced or whatever, but it was much more kind of like assertively ending things. It did like transfer all the all the responsibility to the other person still. But it was at least initially like a lot more straightforward like that.
And that is maybe some pain that is inherent in hierarchical non-monogamy. That if you're in a secondary, or however you want to describe it, partnership with someone, and something's happening in that primary one, it's going to take precedent. And we can talk all day long about whether or not that should be the case. And I think I just see that it often is. And so it's kind of a reality of the way these dynamics can sometimes work that is like painful and problematic, and we got to kind of engage with.
Yeah, and there's also a reality that like people are lonely, and that they want to have, like, for all of the sort of critiques we make of monogamy and like the kind of like you know, going through the motions and of doing it, you know, without any curiosity or interrogation. Part of the reason that it's popular is because people like to have somebody, speaking broadly, people like to like have somebody that they're with all the time. People want to be together with people, like, you know, they want companionship. And like a person who's in a phase in their life or a time in their life where they don't have that companionship, and they're looking for it, they're going to do a lot and make a lot of compromises
To prioritize
it. And maybe that's where some of the kind of like cowboy lassoing stuff comes from, is there's a lot of power in offering that, right? And like, you know, you do get to some extent like dictate some terms if you're like offering that to somebody who doesn't have it. And, you know, I mean, a lot of people are going to make a lot of compromises on the other things that they want in order to get that.
And that is fair in a way. I know this is maybe not a popular take because it's not like non-monogamy practiced in this ideal way, but like what I can offer people that I'm with is worlds different than what a primary partner can. I'm like, of course you can idealize our relationship in some way, shape, or form, because I'm not the person you're necessarily going to call for like help on your taxes, or like when you've got a stomach bug, or, you know, that you're going to fight about how the bathroom smells like pee together. You know, like this is a whole different type of relationship, and the kind of contracting that you're getting into is very different.
Yeah. And like if you were, you know, if you tried to cowboy me away from anybody that I was dating, I would be like, yeah, well, it's been fun, but Sarah cowboyed me, and
I mean, that's complicated. I wouldn't do that because of the values that I'm trying to bring to the way I practice non-monogamy. And I also know that, like, there are things that we can't predict about how we're going to relate. About what's going to happen inside the relationships that we're most dependent on when we panic or when we get scared.
Yeah.
And that's like, you know, the other term that's coming up here is that term attachment panic.
It's not just a hit album by Bloodstar.
Not just a hit album by
the aforementioned alt country band. Wow.
Nope. Yeah, what is...
It's not even a hit album.
Yet.
Yeah, but yes. Until this plug.
What is y'all's understanding of that term, attachment panic?
It's a thing I've heard you say. Boy.
I mean, so, okay, well, just taking the two terms here. I mean, you know, attachment is about how sort of secure you feel in your relationship.
Emotional and physical reliance and security.
So, like, you know, I think of secure attachment as things like things are not going to freak me out if my partner wants to go do something without me, you know, or like I'm not easily going to freak out that like anything means, oh my God, he doesn't love me. Right.
And this ties into what we talk about, like codependence or enmeshment. When you're in a really like codependent or enmeshed dynamic, you can start experiencing like an attachment panic at the smallest thing, you know, at like someone going out to dinner with an old friend, someone needing some time alone, someone prioritizing anything other than the relationship.
The panic is like the fear that you're going to like lose that attachment figure, like that the relationship is going to end because of like that's where the panic is coming from. And then I guess like the idea is that is coming up in sort of like unrealistic circumstances, perhaps. Like you could be having a rational attachment panic, perhaps, but I think in most cases they're less so.
I think it really depends. I mean, it's something that has a lot to do with what kind of attachment trauma you've experienced in your own life, what's happening in that relationship. It's really that fear that a relationship that you deeply rely on for your like safety, survival, emotionally and physically and in all the ways is threatened. And if you're in a relationship where maybe it is threatened, you might experience that panic all over the place. Or if you have experienced like really severe attachment trauma in other relationships or often with like a caregiver when you were young, it might show up in really intense ways that don't always make sense to other people.
So what does that have to do with this? These kinds of situations? You're saying that's the perhaps driving force behind the sort of third parties who are vetoing non-monogamy.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is we talk about non-monogamy in these, and I say we, and I'm talking about myself really specifically, this podcast and the whole culture of non-monogamy. We talk about it in these sort of like idealized terms of how really self-aware, evolved people with great intentions and lots of mutual care can perform these relationships in this ideal way. And the fact of the matter is, these relationships are complex and messy and ever-changing, and things like attachment panic might happen. And so, for example, in the breakups that you and I have been talking about today, I don't know this, but I could imagine that our partners and metamors might have been experiencing some attachment panic in developing these primary relationships, and there being like other people.
And they're just awareness of the person's relationship with us. Like the cowboy is like, I just can't deal with it. Like when I know that you're seeing that person, I'm just like freaking out. Yeah.
And this can be
I
like
can't tolerate it.
An actual like nervous system response. Like people can have real panic attacks. They can really experience the physical manifestations of anxiety. This is kind of nuanced because we don't control when that happens to us, but we do have agency and control over what we do in response to it. So I just kind of like hold that complexity.
Right.
at
Well,
the same
and
time.
then the hinge partner also controls what information everybody has. And like
right.
part of what we're talking about in the triangulation is like they control in both directions.
Yeah.
And so like, they certainly can probably help the person who's experiencing that kind of attachment panic mitigate it in some ways, like again, not by like lying to them probably, but like by managing the information that they give them about their other relationships and like assuring them if they're like in a primary partnership and they want to be, like there's things that they can do to affirm that, right?
Right.
And then probably with the secondary partner, they could just not make it their problem as much, right?
Yeah, and this is not going to happen cleanly or perfectly.
Right. Yeah.
But it is maybe something to keep in mind. And one of the things that I have learned in almost 4 years of doing this now is what information I need to have about metamors, so other relationships that my partners are in, what of that information I want to know, and what of that information I feel compelled to try and get. And having some boundaries with myself, too. Like, I want to know if something that's happening in one of my partner's other relationships is impacting their mood in life. That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're in a relationship with someone, like this person, you all broke up, I knew that was happening, that was impacting your mood in life. That matters to me, and I want to have that information and be able to support you in the ways that I can.
Right.
I want to know if the potential for like our relationship changing is on the table.
Right.
So if my partner has gotten to a point where they're like, things are getting pretty sticky in my life and in these other relationships, and I'm worried that it's going to impact us, and I
Right.
want us to be able to talk about it, I want that too.
Right.
I do not want my partners to process their other relationships, especially insofar as those other relationships might have to do with me, if that makes sense, with me.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
hear from my partner about how my metamor doesn't like me or is freaked out by me or is worried about the nature of our relationship in a processy kind of way.
Yeah.
That is just like, you got to take that somewhere else.
Right.
That's not a fair thing. It's not a fair
Right.
thing for me to be trying to navigate.
Yeah, and it feels unfair because you're just like, what am I supposed to do with that information?
Right.
I can't solve that problem for you. It's like
I may never meet the person
Right.
that you're talking about. I don't have a relationship with
and
them.
it's sort of like it's like my fault in that I am the source of those bad feelings, but there's nothing that I can do about it other than cease to exist.
right.
So-
Or
Yeah.
just like start
That's-
resenting this mystery person
Right.
or this other person that I'm not actually
Yeah.
in this intimate relationship
And I think
with.
maybe that's why that kind of messaging really does, or that kind of like interaction does kind of give you the message. We're probably going to break up because the person is kind of saying, I have this problem and your existence is the source of that problem. And like that could be true, but them telling you that is telling you something, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think so.
I do think there's also a more just sort of like simple practical version of triangulation that to be avoided around just like availability and stuff. And like I've learned very early on, like don't be like, I can't do this thing on this day because of Sarah. Right? Like even when that's true and it would totally make sense for that to be true, like, Sarah doesn't want me to, or like, I have to do XYZ. Even when it's like I have like to take care of, I'm responsible for the kids that night. I would not include your name in that. Like things like that, just like not making it be you that is causing that lack of availability.
Right. I know in the past you and I have both have partners who had started like tallying how many times
Yeah.
one of us was out with somebody else.
Right.
So it's like, wait, I thought Sarah had been out like 4 times in the last 2 weeks. Why can't you go out with me that many times? And it's like, that's you're in
Nope.
bad territory there.
Right.
So
That's
definitely
too
mistakes
much
that you and I
information.
have both made.
Yep. Yeah.
Jessica, what are your thoughts as Alex and I sort of are on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, just sort of the way you were just describing, not wanting to like blame stuff on another person. Like, it made me think about work scenarios where there's like plenty of times where, I don't know, there's been some annoying thing going on because some other person I work with dropped the ball or whatever. But it's like, but then if I'm going to tell somebody else about what happened, like, am I going to show up and be like, well, Alex fucked this up? And so, that's like, I would never do that,
Yeah.
I would just be like, okay, we had to push the deadline back because, or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I need to give you the reason. Here's the new deadline, or like, here's the plan, right? It's sort of like I have figured out what happened inside my team, right? And come up with a plan moving forward. And that's what I'm then taking.
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
And that's how I want to be. And it's easy for me to be that in my like business lady life. I'm feeling like not so sure in my personal life. It's like sometimes you do it, sometimes.
It's hard. It's
Sometimes you
hard,
don't.
and sometimes you don't even know how to. Like, I want to give us some grace here that we're talking about like really intimate, complex parts of us that are sometimes like really scared or acting out the things that we saw in our family or trying to protect us or trying to protect others. Like, that's why the idea of like the cowboy as having malintent just like doesn't scan for me, because in my experience with people in intimate relationships, with the exception of some like sociopathic people out there, everyone is just like,
historically speaking, cowboys are probably sociopaths, like in the whole manifest destiny, frontier mentality, westward expansion,
and
indigenous genocide.
Yes.
They're problematic in that sense. But anyway, continue your point. Your very problematic point, if you want to, Sarah.
Thank you.
No, the floor is yours. Just say what you want to defend cowboys.
My point was just that people's intimate lives are really complicated, and we're often doing the best we can, and our best is often not that great. And it's something we all have in common, I guess. And non-monogamy will point those places out to you. And I guess a question that I have for you, Alex, if this ex-partner of yours had come to you and just said, I've been experimenting with non-monogamy and there are parts of it that feel really good and like who I am. And also I've realized that having a primary partner is the most important thing to me right now. And I can't pursue that and stay in our relationship, and it makes me sad. And I'm sorry. How would that have felt compared to this more kind of protracted, it's this other person's fault, fix it for me sort of dynamic that you were in?
Yeah, I think the protracted, it would have felt better. I think that's not giving them the benefit of the doubt. They kind of tried to do that and couldn't quite follow through on it, and I probably made it a little bit harder by being really, by not just kind of walking away, but sort of continuing to engage with them. And then, but it didn't help that they'd done a bunch of sort of like talking trash about their ex prior to that. So I was like, wait, you mean the person that you said, negated your gender identity and blah, 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 all this other shit. And then it made it really hard to be like, that seems like a bad decision, but okay. But you're right. It would have, again, grounding the responsibility and like making a firm decision and being like, this is what's right for me, but it's hard because I like you, would feel better. But I guess any time that a relationship ends and it's not because you're not getting along.
Right. You're not like sick of each other and you're like, okay, it's one thing if you're in a relationship and you're like, we fight more than we have fun. This is making me more miserable than it's making me happy. We got to end this. Right?
Yes.
That's a kind of relationship with its own pain and its own grief and its own loss.
Yeah.
But there is a kind of like narrative around it you understand.
Right. But it's different than one where it's like, we can't be together because of this circumstance. And, when the circumstance is, I have to move to Tokyo for a job, it's like, that's one. But when it's like, well, I'm still going to be here and everything is going to be exactly the same, but we're just kind of not really allowed to do it because of reasons that come from outside. It's rough.
But even with the Tokyo example, that's someone making a choice.
Right.
Don't triangulate Tokyo. You know, like I mean, to our point here, my job and going to Tokyo for my job is taking priority over my relationships in Seattle right now. That sucks and it's sad.
Right.
But it's the decision I've made. It's very different than I want to be with you and I want to stay with you and I want to like find a way to make it work, but like I have to go to Tokyo because of my job.
I've chosen Tokyo. Yeah, and that's and they're like we were talking about earlier, like there are many ways to say it's not you, it's me. And one of those ways might be I've decided to go back to being monogamous with my ex-partner I've in your case, like I want a primary partner and the person that I've chosen can only tolerate monogamy.
Or even more complicated than that, I want a primary partner, and so we need to like close this down while we figure out what that looks like.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I guess that's a part of this thing that we've talked about, that like most of the people that you're going to interact with in the world of non-monogamy are going to be people in some kind of transition. Like practically speaking, based on, again, our informal survey, it's pretty rare to come across somebody who is like, I've always been non-monogamous, or I've been non-monogamous for 10 years, or something like that. It's much more often people who are making some sort of transition, out of a long-term relationship and experimenting, or I'm trying to think of what some of the sort of other examples that show up quite a bit. But
I mean, definitely of the people I've met and dated in almost 4 years, the majority of the ones that I've stayed in touch with are not still practicing non-monogamy, which I try not to take personally. Some of them are. The ones who are were the people who were married when I met them.
And are no longer married?
No. So the distinction is people I dated who were married are still practicing non-monogamy. The people who I've dated who were exploring non-monogamy and not in primary relationships, the majority of them are no longer non-monogamous.
Right. Well, and that makes
Turned
you
to monogamous.
I know. That's what I'm like. I'm like, oh, yikes.
Well, but like that makes me start wondering about the timeline too. Like maybe they're being monogamous while they establish a primary partnership,
Right.
and then in 2 years they're going to open that primary partnership again. And like maybe you do need to do that for a while to like establish a primary partnership. And maybe what we were saying a while ago, like from a theoretical sense of like, as the secondary partner, you just need to be a lot more patient and like willing to accept the big changes that are going to come along with somebody's life when they're establishing a primary partnership. Like maybe that patience is years long, not like,
Maybe it is years long, or maybe it's also just accepting that some relationship arcs end that way. And that that's okay and also part of this experience. Part of being non-monogamous is that some of these relationships are going to end for other people. And that's painful.
Like you're going to be left for someone else.
Yes. And you're increasing the chances of that happening. And especially if you're in a primary partnership and primarily dating people who aren't. That is a circumstance where this is going to happen. And it feels bad, and your feelings are completely valid, and it's 100% okay for it to feel bad. And it also might not be that anybody has done anything wrong, or there's a villainous cowboy that forced the issue. Maybe is more what I'm saying.
There are just a lot of cowboys out there on the range.
You know, the thing I don't understand about this cowboy metaphor is, aren't cowboys sort of notorious loners? I don't think of cowboys who are like, gotta find me a woman and settle down. I thought like the whole narrative in the culture was that they were just like sort of roaming around, having one-night stands in saloons.
Again, I'm telling you, you're the cow.
Yeah, I think the woman is the cow.
Oh, I keep forgetting that part.
And cowboys do like to lasso cows
They're
a lot.
lassoing cows. It is still not. There's a better metaphor.
Let's work on this.
Actually, thank you for listening to Mistakes Were Made. Find us on Instagram and tell us what would be a better metaphor for this kind of behavior.
Or
than
experience.
the cowboying or experience, because there's got to be a better one that maps better. And if you like this podcast, please follow us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else where you get your podcasts. And also on Instagram at mistakescast is our handle. And we're moving to a every 3-week schedule, right? This is episode 2 of season 3. And we'll be back with episode 3 of season 3 in 3 weeks.
Whoa.
Spooky. So we'll see you in 3 weeks.
There's going to be no yodeling on this entire episode about cowboys?
Oh boy.
We'll put it in post, I guess. I'm not much of a yodeler.
Can we auto-tune that?
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
This is fun. Bye.